Hey guys, welcome to another Night Owl Ramble. Tonight we're going to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is Norse paganism. So as most of you know, especially those who have been watching my channel for an extended period of time, you will know the deities that I work with are primarily of the Norse pantheon. And I know I've covered this here and there on my channel, and I do believe at some point I may have mentioned how this all came to be, but I thought it would be a fun video to kind of talk about it again and talk about some of the things that I have been thinking about lately with deity and some of the things, the direction that my path is going in. I really like to come to my channel and share the progression of what I am experiencing, because I started this channel once again, because this is my second time on YouTube, looking for camaraderie. And very recently, I decided to finally go down the YouTube rabbit hole of searching for other Norse pagans. And I was always very, very apprehensive about doing this. And I was very apprehensive about calling myself a Norse pagan, because unfortunately there is a certain amount of I'm trying to find the right word, but all I'm gonna say is there's a certain amount of disrespect and hate attached to Norse pagan. And that is due to the fact that some very extreme individuals have taken on this spiritual practice, but done so in a way to be very purist, racist, and hateful. And these are not things that align with who I am as a person. They are not things that align with my path and my spiritual journey. I don't believe that they are progressive to who we are as human beings, and I just think that it's extremely disrespectful. And I just don't think that our deities would think that anybody who is not of Scandinavian descent could not work with or worship or practice with the Norse gods. I personally myself am of Scandinavian descent, and that is one of those things that made me know deep down that eventually I would come to the Norse path. I knew that was going to happen, but it doesn't have to be that way. And just because I am of Scandinavian descent, it does not give me any more right to practice Norse paganism over anybody else. So I wanted to make that very clear, and why I have been sort of apprehensive to claim the title of a Norse pagan and search through YouTube to find other Norse pagans and connect with them. But I'm being very pulled to do so, and I'm being very pulled to explore this part of my path in a very heavy sense. Finally, I'm being pulled to study the Edda and the Havamal, and to study the myths and the stories, the sagas, the hero sagas, everything that comes with it, take up the runes. I'm just ready to really dive in, and I don't know fully why it took me this long. When I first started venturing into paganism, I was 15 years old, and most of it was to try and understand the fact that I have mediumship abilities. And this is something that I have gone back and forth with my whole life, thinking I was nuts. And my venturing into New Age books to try and find a way to explain and understand what I was experiencing opened the door to Wicca, which then opened the door to paganism. And it's just been morphing from there on. The one thing that my path has constantly been doing is changing and evolving. So throughout my teens and into my 20s, I mostly resisted the idea of working with personified deity, even though intuitively I knew what deities were in my practice, and I knew that eventually I would end up with the Norse gods, because I knew that I would want to go to my ancestral bloodline, and I knew that was something that I would eventually end up at, just because of how deeply ancestral veneration and working with the dead, although I do believe that ancestors and those of the dead, those are two different things. They can intermix, but they are two different things in my practice. So, but it's just such a heavy presence in my practice, And having those mediumship abilities is what led me there. With some personal deaths that I have lost, this has only gotten stronger, to the point where I do feel that the gods are basically pushing me in this direction, to the point where they're like, girl, get your shit together. What are you doing? And the reason why I resisted personified deity for so long is because, quite frankly, I have a very logical mind, and I have recently been doing some shadow work on that, trying to understand, is this me, or is this because I'm trying to live up to someone else's expectation? There's nothing wrong with having a logical mind. Science was my favorite subject growing up. I have a deep, profound respect for medical science as a person with a chronic illness. I have a deep, profound respect and admiration for space exploration. I have always loved space exploration and astronomy and everything involving the sky and the stars and exploring our solar system. Carl Sagan is a hero of mine. So just to basically throw that out there, or to try and explain. But with that being said, I let that aspect of me, I have let it rule me for too long, to the point where it has had front and center, where the spiritual side of me, which is the side that is dying to flourish, is being suffocated, and I'm sick of it. I'm done with it. There needs to be a balance between the two, of course, and that's something that I will always deeply carry and respect within myself and others around me. But I don't have to see the world the way that everybody else does, or the way that I think they feel I should. And I don't know why it took me till my mid-30s to learn this lesson. It's ridiculous, but I have started to understand that this was the core of my resistance to personified deity, even though I would have so many profound experiences where deity was just constantly giving me signs and symbols, synchronicities, dreams, you name it. It was just basically like the universe was grabbing me by the face and just being like, woman, hello. My experiences with Odin were through a dream. That is the first time that I realized that Odin was calling to me. And I resisted for a very long time, particularly to work with a male personified deity, because I, for some strange reason, had it in my head that my path had to be the furthest from Christianity. Even though I didn't grow up in a Christian household, I didn't have much Christian background. And I know many people in my life who are devout Christians and absolutely wonderful people. So I don't have that negative association. I've had my bad experiences for sure, but for some strange reason I felt that if I worked with a male deity, what difference would it be to Christianity? And then suddenly, rather recently, I realized, why does it matter? Why does it matter if it's close? There are many beautiful things about Christianity. So I resisted until Odin came to me in a dream. And not all of my experiences with personified deity have been profound to the point through a dream, but I do get spiritual dreams very often, or not very often, every now and then I should say. But when I do, they are very vivid, and I can recall every detail, to the point where this happened, I think, in 2012, 2013, and I can still remember every bit of it. It essentially was, I was in a library with a huge glass window, and the library kind of looked like the library from Beauty and the Beast. I know I've mentioned this dream before on my channel before, or I just said before twice, guys. I know I've mentioned this dream on my channel before, but I'm going to reiterate it for the purpose of this video. I remember sitting at a table in front of this window, and I was chatting with an acquaintance of mine who actually is a very committed atheist. And he was looking through a Norse mythology book and talking about how Odin is the god of wisdom and how that's just so great. And I just remember thinking, that's odd, because you were like the furthest thing from any pagan, so this is interesting. And I just remember looking away from him out the window to this massively tall tree. And I just remember kind of quietly whispering to myself, All Father. And I woke up and I was like, okay. So that's a thing now. And that tends to happen with my dreams. When I used to work with the goddess the Morgan, and that was another dream. But it doesn't always happen that way. So for instance, Freya, for example, who is the goddess I work with most heavily now, and I have been working with Freya since 2016. I didn't have a dream about her. I suddenly was very pulled to learning about her. And so I started to research her, and I started to learn about her mythology, her stories, and then I purchased a statue, which to me, when I purchase a statue for a deity, that's a really big commitment. So I still don't have one for Odin, although I have things to represent him. But for Freya, I definitely do, and you guys see it on my altar all the time because she sits front and center because, well, that's where she wants to be, so. But it doesn't always have to be a profound dream. There's a kitty for tickling me. Either way, my experiences were either that of something so profound that I couldn't really ignore it, or something much like in the case of Freya, where I had this sudden pull to understand her, and then suddenly there will be these synchronicities after synchronicities, and that's usually the signs that I understand of how a deity is trying to get my attention. And recently I was thinking about, well, what are the gods? And then I started to realize, why does it really matter? Honestly, I do believe that there are many people of many different walks of life, and I feel as though they are meant to see the world through the lens of how they're meant to see it, because it's what works for them, and that's okay as long as they're not harming anyone else. I don't generally tend to have much of an opinion towards it, and that is something that I should hold towards myself too. Maybe this is how I'm meant to see the world, and that's okay. So the other thing that I was thinking recently was, kitty hair still tickling my nose, that we have astounding evidence that all of these ancient cultures that have went before us have revered these deities. And most often these deities have a lot of similarities from culture to culture. But if you think about the population of our planet, even back then, when there's the kitty fur. Even back then in ancient societies, when paganism was very different than it is today, it's an astounding amount of societies that worshipped these deities. And to me, that is profound. And I think it has to say something. And that also was an eye-opener to me when it comes to working with personified deity, and specifically working towards the Norse gods, just because their stories are, well, we only know so much. So it can be kind of challenging to learn more about them, and you only get so far before you start to understand that a lot of it starts to become your own personal experience and your own personal take on what you know of their stories. But I've come to realize that this is where my path was going to end up, and I can't honestly guarantee that it will end up staying this way, because I always try to keep an open mind of the fact that my path has already evolved so much since I first started when I was 15 versus now I'm 34, that who knows where it will be in the next 15 to 20 years. So I always want to keep an open mind with that, but I feel at home here being a Norse pagan, and there are still other deities outside of the Norse pantheon that I honor or have certain relationships with. And I don't just strictly work with the Norse deities. I don't want to be boxed in that such, because I feel like if there is a deity that wants to contact me and work with me in some shape or form, that's perfectly fine. As you guys might know, around this time last year, I was getting pulls towards Santa Muerte, and totally shocked me. Didn't expect that. But as it turns out, as the year had gone on and I started to learn more about her, I ended up purchasing a statue of her, and she pretty much just hangs out on my altar for the dead. And that's, I think, honestly what she wanted. And so I leave offerings for her as well as offerings for the dead on my altar for the dead. That's what I call it. It's over there. I should give you guys an updated tour on that sometime, because it has moved and is bigger. But as I mentioned earlier in this video, that is a big part of my practice, and I think she just wanted a place in it. Totally fine with me. I also have 2 statues in my living room. One is of Kuan Yin and one is of Baset. Those hang out on a small shelf in my living room, and they have offering bowls, and that's where they are. They're my household deities. That's kind of what I refer to them to. So I do have other deities in my practice that are outside of the Norse pantheon that have their purposes. But when it comes to deities that I commune with regularly, that I have a stronger connection to, that would be Odin and Freya, and now Frigga. So I kind of just really wanted to talk tonight about a lot of my head noise involving Norse Pagan and my hesitancy with really diving deeper into it, but I just don't think I can ignore this anymore. I know this is who I'm supposed to be. I know this is a part of my journey, and I know this is where I'm meant to be. But I have to say, it is extremely refreshing to find other Norse pagans on YouTube and watch their content. I will link a couple of channels that I have found down below. You guys should really check them out. They're awesome. If you guys have any other references for books, podcasts, and channels, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to explore more about this. I have reached out in my local pagan community also, and I've tried to find the Norse pagan community here in Minneapolis. So hopefully I can maybe attend some bloods and see what sort of community we have here as well. I would love to be a part of that in a sense. And I think I'm just searching for camaraderie, and to know that I'm not alone, and to know that my hesitancy when jumping into this was also valid. But I don't have that anymore. I feel pretty good about it. So thank you for watching this. I'm sure this video is quite long at this point, but you know, my night owl rambles, they tend to kind of go that way. With that being said, blessed be.